main problem is room 42, the Goyas. One of the lads was doing early morning cleaning there, and he saw a grey shadowy shape of a monk, and he's flatly refused to go in that room ever since. Another problem we got is room 28, 17th century Dutch. Even the patrol dogs have refused to go there. Blokes have talked about hearing knocking on doors, seeing grey shapes, the room going cold all of a sudden. Even the chief said he was walking through there and a hand tapped him on the shoulder.
I wasn't the trustees' first choice as director of the National Gallery. They first offered the job to a very successful American director in Fort Worth, and he turned it down. So to my great astonishment, I found myself as their second choice. We need a National Gallery today for exactly the same reasons we needed a National Gallery in 1824, which is that everybody needs somewhere to refresh themselves, somewhere to find peace, tranquility, excitement, delight. That need is, I'd have thought, greater now than it was then. Is everything all right for the press this afternoon? The National Gallery has about 2,000 pictures in all, and about 700 of those are on the main floor. We think those are among the greatest pictures ever painted. And the greatest artists we have in great numbers. The most enjoyable thing about being a director of the National Gallery is being close every day to these pictures.
I have sore feet from trudging through the National Gallery, all full of marvels. And what do you think? I have a favorite picture. I know I shouldn't, and crushes on works of art are the worst kind of amateurism, but it absolutely stuns me. A big picture called An Allegory with Venus and Cupid by Bronzino, 1503 to 72, it says. And otherwise, I know nothing about him. But what a statement. I stare and stare and can't figure it out. What hits you first is the nude figure of a beautiful woman, superbly fleshly and naked as a jaybird except for a coronet of jewels. I mean, she isn't just nude, which can be like a corpse on the embalmer's table, but astonishingly naked. A youth who looks about 14 stoops toward her from the left, kissing her, and it's plain that her tongue is pushing between his lips. French kissing, they call that. Godfather. And if they are really mother and son, it's a pretty queer situation. Furthermore, his right hand is on her left breast, the nipple peeping between his index and second fingers, which it wouldn't do unless the kiss meant more than just good morning or something like that. Bronzino says something about a very different world, and a world I want to learn about. Nobody is going to tell me it's just an arrangement of form and color. It's what my great-aunt calls a good lesson.
Monty Python, the Flying Circus. when we were beginning Python, I was spending a lot of time in the National Gallery. I'd come in here desperate for ideas. And I remember walking through one day, I just jumped out of the room, and there was this great porcelain-skinned, naked woman being fondled by this youth. I was drawn to it. Suddenly I gravitate to one element in this whole picture, and it was the foot. Every time you walk into one of these places, you're offered a great choice of experiences. I don't know, I find it a great monument to rape and pillage, basically. When you think where all of these have been and how the English got their hands on them. It always intrigues me, because it's all now terribly pompous, but these things were stolen. Well, the British Museum really gets me when we get the Elgin marbles. You know, these things have been raped and pillaged from all over the world, and maybe it's a sense of national pride when you come here and you see what a great group of pirates this country used to be.
Really, I suppose we have to thank Napoleon for the foundation of the National Gallery and Lord Liverpool. The repayment of Austrian war debts in the 1830s gave the British government enough money to start buying some major private collections which became the seed corn of the National Gallery. There was great controversy about whether or not to have a National Gallery, and artists like Constable were vehemently against the idea of collecting pictures for other artists to look at and probably copy. I mean, that was the worrying thing. I think they thought, you know, my God, we'll have all these old paintings being copied by living artists, and there won't be any artistic development as a result. The English were very slow to come round to the idea. It was chewed over for a long time in a fairly Philistine parliament who had other things to spend their money on. It was the last National Gallery to be founded in the whole of Europe.
I think it's clear that every painting is a world of its own. It's one of the key purposes of the gallery, I think, is to insist that great painting is the creation of a total imaginative world. And the aim of the gallery is to allow people to come and enter those worlds. The gallery has always been free from the beginning, and we feel that that's the essential way of allowing the public to take possession of their own pictures.
Can you tell me the names of any painters, just to remind ourselves of some painters? Yes, you give us one. Good. Anybody else? Leonardo da Vinci.
It's very hard to know why people do come to the National Gallery. Clearly some come because it's raining and there's nothing else to do. Some come because they've got 10 minutes to wait for a train at Charing Cross. Some come quite clearly because they're upset and want consolation in the pictures. Others come, who knows, to meet friends, whatever.
This is the 16th century Italian room, and you'll notice it's nearly all portraits, but of very different quality. You see, you have Moroni, who's good enough, a wonderful Lotto, there's Veronese with the angel doing acrobatics in the air, a grand Titian, and one of the most intriguing pictures in the whole National Gallery, this superb, rather off-putting, but still superb Lorenzo Lotto. And clearly she's trying to impress upon us what a virtuous, modest girl she is. But look at her. She's not attractive with those large, vigorous shoulders and that sharp nose and the way she fixes us with a rather basilisk stare. And for all her talk of her chastity and what a paragon she is of virtue, you'll notice how she has tucked her jewellery into her bosom instead of putting it round her neck to draw our attention clearly to a place she wants us to look at. In fact, methinks the lady doth protest too much. And if you say, well then, where's the spirituality here? The spirituality to me is that here we are confronted with the mystery of the human personality. I defy anybody to look at that picture and have a capsule understanding of what Lucretia is, which, of course, is how we should act with everybody. Reverence them, try and take them in, but never make a judgment. I live in complete solitude, and I spend about 7 hours a day in prayer. I feel I'm one of the luckiest people that ever was to be allowed to get close to God like that. And I think art is a valid way of getting close to him. It's an overwhelming spiritual experience to come to the gallery. To come to any gallery where great art is shown should send one out changed. It's an encounter with God, really, though I hesitate to use his name because it frightens some people. What I love about Rubens is what I call the Rubens look. There's a sort of sweet frankness in the way Rubens people look at one another that you get nowhere else. Now, you see, this you might say is an archetypal male-female confrontation. You have the three goddesses, Juno, Venus, and Minerva, who've come to be judged as whom is the most beautiful, and Paris is going to give the golden apple to the one who wins. And you can see that both Juno and Minerva consider themselves goddess. They're pranking and showing themselves off, but Venus is so humble. She looks at Paris with that kind of wondering sweetness that only Rubens gets in her face. And she's clearly saying, can it be me? Have I won the golden apple? And if you look at Paris too, he's looking at three naked goddesses. And there's nothing but wonder in his face. He's seeing one of the most beautiful sights any human being can see, the wonder of the human body.
The National Gallery is the best place for romance because it's the most erotic place. I'm told that the V&A is better for picking up people because it's got all those statues. And the Natural History Museum is also a very useful place. But I don't like it, it's too much like school. I think the best place is the National Gallery because of the paintings. I think of the paintings very much as if they belong to me. The gallery's always been very important for artists of all times, and I don't see why it should be any different now. I mean, I know lots of young painters who come here regularly to look. It's part of our history. This room is not an ivory tower, but it is a very self-contained room in the middle of this museum. So, I mean, you're working in, almost like you're working in the belly of the beast. The panels that I was asked to do for the restaurant, they are based on Crivelli's garden. The way I connect to the pictures in the collection is through the stories. There was a big verbal tradition in Portugal. I was told stories ever since I was born, I think, by aunts and grandmothers and people who worked in the house for my parents. Stories are a way to make sense of things because stories give a shape and a form to chaos. It was a deliberate decision to paint the female saints because, first of all, I prefer painting women, and it's also a homage to them, really, to their steadfastness and the way that they don't change their mind about things, although they're put to the rack and whatever.
In 1913-14, the government evidently realized they were not able to crush the militant movement. So it seemed they determined to eliminate Mrs. Pankhurst. She was put in a damp underground cell in Holloway Prison, a veritable death cell. At this same time, a great many people in London went to see the Velasquez Venus, a new picture that had been paid for with an enormous sum of money. I felt that the public should be notified of the iniquity being practiced on Mrs. Pankhurst. The best way I could do it was to attack a woman of financial value. So I went to the gallery with my chopper. I found the picture had been heavily glazed for its protection. And I thought it's almost hopeless when dear old Mother Nature came to my rescue by telling one of the detectives that it was time for lunch. I got in behind the newspaper and gave from the first wang of a picture. I had no time to count the slashes, but I was quickly overpowered, bundled into a taxi, driven back to Home Sweet Home, Holloway Prison.
When the Second World War broke out in 1939, there was naturally enormous concern about what would happen to the great valuable pictures left in the centre of London when German bombs were raining down upon the city. The Hampton site, which is the site of the new Sainsbury wing, was bombed 6 times during the war.
Churchill was concerned that the collection might be evacuated abroad and sent a ringing telegram, bury them in the bowels of the earth, but not a picture shall leave these islands. So they were all sent off to a slate mine in Wales. The entire collection was out of the gallery within 48 hours of war breaking out.
The National Gallery had another sort of reputation in the Second World War. It became a kind of centre in London where people came for concerts, and Myra Hess was playing the piano, and it still had a kind of cultural significance.
The entire collection came back from the slate mine in Wales in impeccable condition, having spent the whole time in absolute humidity, in the best possible conditions.
The kings who slept in the caves are awake and out. The pictures are back in the gallery. Old masters twirl their cadenzas, whisper and shout. Hundreds of windows are open again on a vital but changeless world. A daydream free from doubt. So fling wide the windows, this window and that. Let the air blowing from times unconfined to then, from places further and fuller than there, purge our particular time-bound, unliving lives, rekindle a Pentecost in Trafalgar Square.
Paintings have mattered to me for over 50 years. They give me greater interest and joy than almost anything else in life. 30 years or more ago, I used to go on pilgrimages to places where different artists had been. I've been to Tahiti 3 times in search of Gauguin. I think of the gallery as my club. Sometimes one likes the same painting much more than on another occasion. A lot depends on the mood one is in. I don't know why, but this painter, Salvatore Rosa, will never allow me to walk through this particular gallery without calling me over. I'm always drawn to him. And when I get near to him, I read the motto, which says, keep silent, unless what you have to say is more interesting than silence. And I feel he's reprimanding me. So I smile back. I don't like very much the Watteau painting with two figures in it, one playing a guitar, because it's too pretty for my taste. Particularly the man dressed in pale pink I find rather sickly.
Dora had been in the National Gallery 1,000 times, and the pictures were almost as familiar to her as her own face. Passing between them now, as through a well-loved grove, she felt a calm descending on her. Her footsteps took her to various shrines at which she had worshipped so often before. The great light spaces of Italian pictures, more vast and southern than any real south. The angels of Botticelli, radiant as birds, delighted as gods, and curling like the tendrils of a vine. The enclosed and gilded world of Crivelli. She felt that the pictures belonged to her, and reflected ruefully that they were about the only thing that did.
I love the Rembrandt room and find it difficult to walk through without stopping. One thing that attracts me very much is not only his brilliant skill at putting paint on canvas, but his incredible ability to make quite elderly-looking people look interesting and attractive, and one wants to know them.
We're all very interested at the moment in whether paintings are by Rembrandt or by people round him. Now, what is very clear, we've discovered, is that all the people round him use exactly the same pigments, exactly the same canvas as Rembrandt does. The scientific department in the National Gallery has pioneered the study of pigments and varnishes and supports so that we can now clean a picture with confidence. That was the first reason for having it, but as so often, what emerged was something quite unexpected, that as they analysed the pictures for cleaning, they actually discovered that they found out an enormous amount about the way they'd been painted. And, for instance, in our small Margrethe de Geer portrait, there are some very unusual elements in the way the paint is built up and the layers occur, which is certainly not like anything else in Rembrandt. Now, we're then left to decide whether we feel so confident that the way the paint is used just looks so like Rembrandt that this is him painting in an unusual way, and why shouldn't Rembrandt paint in an unusual way? Or whether, having been alerted to something odd, we feel that, in fact, other elements are odd too, and maybe it's not by Rembrandt.
He saw the radio propped on the little stool and asked me if I played it while I worked. I said I did.
Play it then.
There was a Haydnish sonata, a gentle piano tracking up and back in patterns which you could half anticipate even if you'd never heard the piece before. I began to relax a bit.
Tell me what you're doing.
I stopped and turned.
No. Just talk to me as you do it. It's wonderful. I go and sit there while she works. The hungry eye hoovers up her stout jugful of brushes, her bottled solvents, xylene, propanol, acetone, her jars of vivacious pigment, her special picture restorer's cotton wool, which with teasing banality turns out to be mere economy pleat from pretty. Fashions in the universe of picture restoration tend to change. One moment it's out with a Brillo pad and scour, scour, scour. Another moment it's retouch with a decorator's brush, load every rift with pigment, and so on. Here in the art hospital, the slash is mended. The pits and ruts are polyfilled, and the retouching is about to begin.
I don't like the idea of great restorers. there are sort of perhaps superstar prima donna restorers. The important thing is the painter and the painting. I've worked on a lot of paintings which have been quite badly damaged with quite large losses and holes. And while it may take me months or even years to work on them, it's terribly exciting to see a picture that looks like a snowstorm coming back together and becoming something like the artist originally intended. When it was last cleaned in about 1830, they didn't put any varnish on, and instead it's accumulated a great deal of grey surface dirt. And what we've been removing is 150 plus years of dirt. That also involved moving the old restoration. It's revealed, for example, splits, flake losses, woodworm holes, lots of woodworm exit holes out through the front of the picture. I'm now almost at the end of the restoration of the painting, and here are two damages which we suspect, because of their shape and because of their position on the painting, were probably caused by candle burns. I don't think you can be too serious and intense about paintings. Perhaps it's rather like medical jokes. Doctors, of course, are always making the most ghastly jokes about patients and things that go wrong. Restorers often, I think, rather shock and horrify art historians by their flippant attitude towards the paintings. We often laugh at them, mock things that we don't think are terribly good. Sometimes very famous paintings we're slightly rude about. Often in the past, restorers, particularly those of the 19th century, couldn't resist the temptation to improve pictures, sometimes dramatically, sometimes just subtly, as in, for example, this painting of St. Jerome by Cosimo Torre, where cleaning has revealed that the restorer couldn't resist slightly widening the very thin and stringy arm of St. Jerome. And this is actually very easily removed with the varnish. You can see the difference here.
Downstairs is something that really intrigues me. The secondary, the reserve collection. This just piques something inside me that makes me want to go and find out what they're talking about. These are the poor relations, these are the sad, the paintings that sort of weep silently through the night because nobody really loves them down here. They're not lit very nicely. In a way, walking around here is nice because nobody's telling you that these are great paintings and you must revere them and respect them. You can decide for yourself. My assumption when somebody says don't enter is there must be some forbidden secret there that should be revealed. Even more embarrassing treasures that are tucked away. The first time I saw this, I thought of the film Alien. And there's this terrible dragon, this terrible, slimy, glistening beast. I think it's quite wonderful the way they've done the skin texture, just eating somebody's face, which is an incredibly cruel and violent act. And then we've got, I wonder what the little old ladies think of this.
The National Gallery. And crammed into this building in London's Trafalgar Square is one of the finest and most valuable art collections in the world. Now, it's getting a chance to grow. The government has brought the empty site next door from the Canadian government, and eventually there'll be an extension built onto the Great Gallery that'll make it possible to see the nation's treasures to the best advantage. At present, there isn't enough space for everything, and many of the great paintings must be stored away from the public's eye. We talked about this to the director of the gallery, Sir Philip Hendy.
Sir Philip, now that you've been promised the site next door, what's going to happen to the gallery?
We shan't get that site for at least 20 years, you know. But in the meantime, we've plenty of work to get on with.
The problem of extending the National Gallery has been a long-running cultural farce of truly British dimensions. The thing has been concentrated really on that small piece of land to the west of the gallery. It sat there for more than 30 years as a car park, while the debate went on, should we have a new extension, should we not, how are we going to pay for it? But the government was unwilling to pay for it, and so a deal was struck that a private developer would have an office consent to build an office block on the site, and on top of that, they would very graciously give the nation a set of galleries. And that developed into even more of a farce, because a big architectural competition was held in the early 1980s. 79 entries, 7 were shortlisted, and one of those was chosen by the trustees and their advisors, although that was very, very controversial.
I would understand better this type of high-tech approach if you demolished the whole of Trafalgar Square and started again, with a single architect responsible for the entire layout. But what is proposed seems to me like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much loved and elegant friend.
The last resort failed to get planning permission and really ended in shambles, I think, it'd be fair to say. And we were in the fortunate position of being able to do something, and we all felt strongly about it, and with a rush of blood to the head, we decided to do it. But no, I don't think that it is the role of the private individual to fund these sort of major extensions to museums. I think that is government's responsibility. I don't want to be political about it. But one can say that because no government of any persuasion has ever done anything for this site.
When we were chosen for this gallery project, I felt I was the happiest architect in the world. I have a particular love for English historical architecture, and so it was very thrilling for me to think that we could try to connect with this tradition. We started out by loving the old building and respecting it. It has a wonderful quality of rhythm in the composition of the facade. We decided to do on the facade of our building straight on what the Wilkins building does obliquely. We think of our building as separate from the Wilkins building, but also inflecting towards it, almost as you bow towards somebody. It is acknowledging it and dependent on it.
If you look at it from Trafalgar Square, it's rather like looking at a large wedding cake, and a slice has been taken off one end of it and just moved slightly to one side of the plate so that you can see all the rich fruit inside and all the crisp white icing on the front. It has been criticized for the blankness of the rear elevation, that you feel a bit as though, behind the Odeon or something. And he could be criticized for perhaps being a little too subtle.
We certainly don't satisfy the pure classical historicists who would say that we're not being pure enough. We don't satisfy the modernists who say that we're not purely or extremely modern. I rather enjoy that position. And I think it's a rather English position in architecture, which does glory in its classicism and not being hyper-correct. What we've done is refer more specifically to Tuscan Renaissance architecture, where there's Pietra Serena, this kind of gray-green stone Brunelleschi used in churches and in palaces. That was the trim for the doors and the columns. And then the walls were a rather recessive light gray. We also included windows in some of the walls that look out into, not directly onto the outside, again, to temper the light as it comes in. Lighting is perhaps the most important quality in any art gallery, and the trustees and the clients, happily for us, wanted to employ natural light. And natural light is hard to deal with because now we have very strict standards involving the preservation of paintings.
Right, well, something else that I think we ought to be discussing is what goes on up here, because we've got the first contrast between the sequence of Italian rooms and the north up here with Van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait. This, I think, is where the problems begin, because it's such a small room, and there's only one way out of it, the same way as you came in. Yes, I wonder if it might help if you just moved it round a bit onto this wall, because then people will be drawn more into the room.
If people are going to see that picture, which then they're going to want to, the room will get crowded.
What do you think of the idea of hanging this crucifix over the entrance?
I'm worried about how the feet of the crucifix, or at least the back of the feet of the crucifix, will obscure the Virgin of the Rocks by Leonardo.
Well, the alternative would be to hang it in room 1, above the panels from Ducci's Maestà.
to 17, crucifix is about to come up in the lift. Over.
Lighting seems to work pretty well, doesn't it?
You are aware of some of the bumps near Christ's chin, actually. I just looked just around. We'll see in a moment when they took the ladder away.
We had to reorganize the whole collection anyway because of the Sainsbury wing, and we thought we'd take advantage of that. Over here, what you're planning? There are really two ways of presenting a great collection. You either do it by national schools, French, Spanish, German, or else you do it by date. All collections have been hung by national schools because all art history has been written by national schools. We now feel that there's not actually the way things happened, because there was a huge amount of contact within Europe at any stage. People moved around, pictures moved around. If you think of the fact that our great Netherlandish portrait, the Van Eyck portrait of the Arnolfini, it's actually a portrait by a northerner of an Italian couple. The Italian couple were living in Bruges. They commissioned a northern artist to paint them, and then they sent pictures back to Italy. So the idea of seeing Netherlandish painting and Italian painting as separate is completely silly. I think the National Gallery is the first to hang chronologically. And that's because we've had this necessity to reorder, so we had to start thinking again. But also because our collection allows us to do it better than any other collection in the world.
There are lots of marvellous little details which are clever and ingenious, but the sum total of them is something much more than that. The building still retains its own character as a work of art, and yet is extremely welcoming. The staircase is very surprising, most extraordinary. It's an architectural joke, and yet it's also very grand. And it leads you to some extent up the garden path because you end up at a blank wall. But it also beckons you and suggests that the treasure's at hand. Seeing the huge chima at the end of these receding arches is a very theatrical but totally successful effect. And hung like this, it really looks as if eventually you could climb out of the windows into the ideal landscape beyond. I think the space is enormously successful because it's not uniform. The pictures, of course, are not at all uniform. Most of them are refugees from architecture. They used to be hung in churches or above altars. It's very hard to describe the sort of living neutrality of the surroundings, which are just what you need. One of the most extraordinary things about this gallery is when you walk out of it into the original National Gallery, one can't escape a slight feeling of disappointment. They're placed against mock period background, which works to some extent with some pictures. But here, without being clinical, it's a space which is sufficiently retiring and yet has enough specific character that the pictures can say what they have to say. Well, once one's inside this building, I think the old building looks tatty and small, and though there are some very good rooms in it, it looks pathetic by comparison. I can't believe it was ever thought to be a great building, but I'm very pleased he wasn't more deferential to it. It certainly didn't deserve anything much more than demolition, I can't help thinking, looking at this. What a pity we couldn't knock that building down and get him to design that as well.
There's no question that some people won't like it. It's inevitable when you do something good and take a definite stand that there's going to be controversy, at least at the beginning. But we hope Prince Charles will like it, and we hope lots of people will like it, and especially the public will like it.
I'm rather pleased, I must say, by the result. Because obviously it is a very difficult thing to do, to add an extension to an existing building like the National Gallery. And I think that, on the whole, the architect has managed very successfully with a very difficult job, particularly to try to fulfill all the different requirements that there were. And I mean, I think it has worked remarkably successfully.
That's entirely natural. Now this is, we just finished cleaning here.
And which is this one again?
It's the San Pier Maggiore altarpiece from the Church of St. Peter in Florence.
And how did this come into the collection?
It was bought in its totality in the 1850s to show how bad Italian art was before Raphael. And we've been cleaning it steadily to get it ready for the opening of the wing.
And that was done in-house, was it?
Yes. Yes.
This is so wonderful how it's come up. I think all that is so fantastic. Marvelous. My favourite picture through here.
Which one? The Uccello, the one straight ahead, yes. It's an originally happy picture, isn't it?
I don't know why, but I was thinking about the, which is it the newsletter, the favourite picture?
Yes. Yes.
Well, no, I haven't known, but I think I might easily choose that.
That would be terrific. That would be terrific.
I don't know why, but I just think it's riveting.
Yes.
It's totally sort of timeless.
It's totally timeless, isn't it? It's absolutely still. This is Lord Verulam's picture, the Petrus Christus, Grimston. It's a long-term loan in the gallery. He's been here for nearly 100 years.
Is it really?
And he's Grimston's, he's Lord Verulam's ancestor, painted by Petrus Christus in the 1450s, 60s.
Molded, these shapes here.
Those are taken almost from the damage.
Is it?
Yes.
What I particularly admire is the way in which he's handled the interior spaces of the gallery, which I think really is a triumph. And the actual quality of space and the colour of the background and the tonal differences and so on, I think are remarkably successful and give a great sense of presence and elegance and also simplicity, which I think is one of the great hallmarks of this extension. And I think the pictures do look remarkably good, particularly when you get the vistas and the glimpses of pictures through the openings, through the archways. I think it has made a very great contribution to the gallery and I think to London in that sense. What it hasn't done is to shout at the old friend from nearby. I mean, it hasn't produced, a rather raucous, younger person standing beside saying, "Look how old and wrinkled you are," so to speak. I think it has quite sensitively complimented the old building, whatever you may think of it. So I think, on the whole, it has been a great success.
I like to be able to come back to the National knowing certain things will always be there. It's a great sense that life has a sense of continuity and solidity. But what I think is the exciting part is for some kid off the streets who's got nothing, comes in out of the cold, and suddenly he sees something, and a door or a window opens up. One of those pictures starts telling him a story, telling him about a world that he's never seen. And that gets those particular juices going, and who knows what happens. I mean, you end up with cartoons on Monty Python. That's what you do. That's what happens.
And now for something completely different.
Oh, I'm off. I'm off.
Closing now, please. Trafalgar Square entrance.
Closing down, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm off too.
I'm off.